Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto sighed as he leaned back in his chair. He had his collection of crystals laid out on his desk in front of him and he was going through them out of boredom and curiosity. It was the weekend, so there was no school, and Shisui hadn't been released yet from the hospital and Hawk was away from the village on Anbu duties, so he didn't have anyone to train with. While he could go over to the Yamanakas, with how much he and Ino had drifted apart since her obsession with Sasuke, he just didn't feel comfortable doing that unless he needed to. So, there he was, sitting alone in his apartment, recovering from helping Shisui survive. Truthfully, he was perfectly fine, but when the Hokage tells you to take it easy and recover, you don't really argue. Well, he did quite often, but this was different this time. He needed time to deal with what he did, and being around other people was something he could do without. As he idly played with the crystals, Naruto noticed that the dulled crystals, the ones that he had originally taken from the caves but had faded, were reacting to him. It wasn't very noticeable, but Naruto could feel a connection between them and him. Something he had noticed over the last year was that while he could very strongly feel the chakra inside of him, there was another energy inside him as well, one that didn't react at all like chakra did. It was far less controllable than chakra, far less stable as well. While chakra was like a flow of water that he could direct and channel to be used, this energy was more like electricity, which wanted to be free and needed to be harnessed and controlled. What really interested him was that when he held the crystal, that other energy seemed to stabilize inside him, and also seemed to be drawn towards the crystal in his hand. Considering all these things, Naruto decided to start calling this other energy psionic energy, as it seemed a good fit as it wasn't directed by using seals or hand signs, but by using his mind and, apparently, these mysterious crystals. Using a strip of leather, Naruto picked one of the smaller crystals that still had some energy inside it and wrapped the leather around it to make a pendant. With a slight smile, Naruto tied the newly made necklace off and slipped the cord around his neck, letting the crystal hang down just below his collarbone. Naruto reached for another crystal to organize them again when a spark of psionic energy arced from his fingers. Naruto held up his hand in surprise and tried to replicate the feeling he'd had when the energy surged from him. He fell out of his seat in surprise when another spark of energy shot from his fingers and smacked him in the face. Naruto looked up from his spot on the floor with a wide grin, his first true smile since the fight where he hated for the first time. Awesome. XXXXXXX. Shisui sighed as he walked through the Uchiha compound as he headed towards the clan leader's home to have a very important meeting with Fugaku. It had been 2 weeks since Danzo had betrayed the village and tried to steal Shisui's eyes. Since then, Shisui had heard from the Hokage that his cousin Itachi had come to the Hokage with the revelation that Danzo had told Itachi to prepare to eliminate his own clan. Danzo had told Itachi that it was the will of the Hokage, but when Shisui had been attacked by him, Itachi had gone to the Hokage to see if his orders remained the same. The old Hokage hadn't been pleased to find out how far his old friend's betrayal went. Shisui nodded to one of the Uchiha on guard duty as he entered Fugaku's home, slipping his sandals off as he did. He softly padded across the floor as he headed towards Fugaku's office where he knew the older man would be. He knocked on the door gently and waited for permission to enter. "Come," Fugaku said firmly, his voice slightly muffled through the door. Shisui opened the door and stepped into the room, closing the door behind him as he did. Fugaku was sitting at a low table where a tea set had been placed, sipping a cup of tea as he looked up at Shisui. "Fugaku-sama," Shisui said respectfully as he knelt down on the other side of the table. "Shisui, please, have some tea," Fugaku told him, only the barest hint of a smile on his face as he looked at the best ninja his clan had produced since Madara. Shisui nodded and silently poured himself a cup of tea, taking the time to organize his thoughts. The silence between the two men stretched on for a few minutes before it was broken by Fugaku. "How are you recovering?" Fugaku finally asked after some time. "Well enough, Fugaku-sama. The medic nins at the hospital were able to repair my eye without too much issue, seeing as I was able to get there quickly enough," Shisui replied before taking another sip of tea. "I see," Fugaku said with a nod. "I still have trouble believing that Shimura would sink so low as to try and steal a Sharingan." Shisui frowned as he knew his next comment would not be well received. "Fugaku-sama, I don't believe this was the first time Danzo tried to steal a Sharingan, just the first time that it was found out." Fugaku's eyes narrowed at Shisui's statement. "Explain yourself," he demanded. Shisui sighed sadly. "When we were fighting, I trapped him in a genjutsu that I created myself and have used before. It's extremely difficult to break, even for me," he told his clan leader softly. However, he looked at Fugaku with conviction in his eye. "When Danzo broke my genjutsu, he did so in a truly unique way, by changing the world around him." "Izanagi." Fugaku gasped in shock. "You cannot be serious, Shisui. Perhaps you were mistaken, or didn't see correctly." "My eyes were clear, Fugaku-sama," Shisui cut in with a shake of his head. "My Sharingan was active and I know what I saw. Danzo used the forbidden technique to break free so that he could steal my eye. He used a Sharingan to try and steal an even better one." Fugaku took a long drink of his tea, his mind racing at this information. In order for Danzo to use Izanagi, he had to have already taken at least one Sharingan beforehand, as only a mature Sharingan could be used to perform that technique. It cost the eye that used it its sight, which is why the technique was forbidden. Shisui decided to press his advantage while his clan leader was off balance. "Fugaku-sama, I think with this new development, that the Uchiha's plan should be discontinued. Our true enemy was never the Hokage, or even the village as a whole. It was Danzo," he said firmly. "What do you mean?" Fugaku asked him curiously, still trying to wrap his mind around this new information. "Fugaku-sama, Danzo just about admitted to me that he was behind the troubles that have plagued our clan, and since he was forced to flee the village, those that were causing issues for us, spreading rumors and casting doubts on our loyalty to the village, have also gone silent," Shisui told him seriously. "It's not a far stretch to conclude that they were doing so under Danzo's orders, trying to make us do something desperate in order to justify his actions in exterminating us. He knows that the Uchiha would never bow to him, never be under his control, so he sought to wipe us out so that he could take the source of our strength for his own." Fugaku found himself nodding in agreement with the younger man. He had been thinking similar thoughts the last few days, and the latest information only confirmed his worst fears. They had nearly played right into Danzo's plans, so blinded by their pride, ironically enough, that they couldn't see what was truly going on. He took another long drink of his tea as he thought about what to do now. "Perhaps, it is time for us to look past our anger and wounded pride," Fugaku said softly as he turned his head to look out his office window at the village. He could see the Hokage's tower in the distance and he realized that there was a great opportunity here if he had the courage and strength to walk a different path. He nodded to himself in thought. "As you said, Shisui, the Hokage and the village aren't our enemies. It was Danzo who proved himself to be no ally of the Uchiha, willing to destroy us in his pursuit of more power." Shisui looked up at Fugaku hopefully. He hadn't even needed to use anything but words at this point to get Fugaku to change his mind. He wasn't looking forward to the smug look on Naruto's face when he found out that he had been right. Fugaku-sama, Shisui said softly after a few minutes of silence. Shisui, you were also incorrect about something, Fugaku said finally as he turned to face him. While the Uchiha as a whole would never follow Danzo, it seems that he was able to convince several of our people to leave with him when he fled the village. Shisui frowned at that new information. It was extremely disturbing to hear that, as with even just one Sharingan in his control, Danzo was dangerous. With several sets at his disposal, Shisui shuddered at the thought. What would you have me do, Fugaku-sama? Shisui asked his leader. Fugaku poured himself some fresh tea as he started to fill in Shisui on his thoughts for the future, a future that they now had thanks to the efforts of both Shisui and, unexpectedly, Uzumaki Naruto. XXXXXXX. Hiruzen didn't look up as he heard the door to his office open and close, busy reading a proposed bill to allow more resources to be used to track and hunt down Danzo. He signed it with a heavy heart before setting it aside to look up at his visitor. After almost a month since the incident, it still wasn't easy to think about his old friend's betrayal. Shisui-kun, thank you for coming. How are you recovering? He asked kindly as he looked at the young man who had taken a seat on the other side of his desk. Well enough, Hokage-sama, Shisui replied with a slight smile. He had stopped wrapping his eye but knew that it wasn't fully healed. He wasn't sure it ever fully would be. You sent for me, sir. Hiruzen chuckled and smiled at the young man. It was in large part thanks to him that Naruto had turned out so well. There was very little that he would refuse Shisui should he ask for it, though he wasn't exactly planning on letting him know that. He pulled out his pipe and lit it before taking a long pull from it. Yes, I did. I've been thinking about young Naruto's reward for helping you in bringing Danzo's actions into the light, as well as his efforts in assisting your battle against Root, and I could use your input. Of course, Hokage-sama. How can I be of service? Shisui said with a smile. He was glad that Naruto would be getting more than a pat on the head, as he had literally saved Shisui's life. If anyone deserved a reward, it was the young blonde. I have spent the last month looking at similar situations, and though many of them were during war times, I believe there is enough of a precedent that no one can object to my decision, Hiruzen told Shisui with a smile. You are the Hokage, sir. Your word is law, Shisui reminded the older man softly. Hiruzen let out a soft laugh, smoke filling the air. Ah, the idealism of youth. Don't ever lose that, Shisui-kun, Hiruzen told him. Technically you are correct, of course. However, should the council not approve of my decision, they can make things far more difficult than they should be. I see, Shisui said with a frown. But we aren't here to discuss my issues with the council. Now, I have a request to make of you in relation to Naruto's reward, Hiruzen said as he shifted some papers around before he found what he was looking for. He slid it over to Shisui and leaned back in his seat, puffing on his pipe as he watched Shisui read. As Shisui read, he was filled with both joy and sorrow. What the Hokage had planned for Naruto was an amazing future, but unfortunately, Shisui wouldn't be able to play the part that Sarutobi had in mind for him. When he finished, he set the paper down and looked up at Hiruzen with a frown. Hokage-sama, while I am extremely honored by the faith you have in me, I'm afraid that I must decline this offer, Shisui said sadly. I'm afraid I don't understand, Hiruzen said in confusion. The basic summary of what he had given Shisui to read was that Naruto would be given a test and should he pass, he would be officially graduated from the academy and placed in an apprenticeship under Shisui until such time as he proved himself able to be a chunin. There are several reasons why I must decline, sir. The first is that I am too close to Naruto. He's like a brother to me, and I don't feel I could remain objective enough. I would be more than happy to continue in my current course of helping him when I can, but no more, Shisui said with a shake of his head. And the other reason? Hiruzen asked curiously. He could respect Shisui's decision, though it didn't make things any easier for the old man. As I'm sure you know, when Danzo left, he didn't leave alone, Shisui told him seriously. When Hiruzen nodded, Shisui continued. Several members of nearly every clan disappeared right after Danzo fled the village. Whether they left willingly or not, they must be tracked down and brought back, especially those of the Uchiha clan. I see, Hiruzen said as he looked at Shisui in thought. You intend to track them down? By yourself? No, Hokage-sama, Shisui replied with a shake of his head. I intended to apply to join Anbu, specifically the Hunter Nin division, and assist them in recovering those taken from our village. After telling the Hokage that, Shisui took out a folded piece of paper and slid it across to the old man. Hiruzen took the paper and opened it up to reveal a formal letter of intent to join Anbu. He sighed as he folded the paper back up and placed it to the side. With your record and achievements, I cannot rightfully deny you this, Shisui. However, this does leave me in a difficult situation, Hiruzen said with a sigh. There aren't many that are in a position to apprentice Naruto, and none of the others that I can think of would be able to see beyond his burden. Shisui nodded in agreement. If there was one thing he could never fully forgive the village for, it was the treatment of Naruto. There were very few that saw beyond his status as a Jinchuriki and could see Naruto for the young and gifted ninja he was shaping up to be. However, Shisui perked up when he had a thought. Hokage-sama, what about Anko? Anko, what makes you suggest her? Hiruzen said in surprise. He hadn't even considered the former apprentice of Orochimaru. She and Naruto met before, just over a month ago, Shisui told his Hokage. She was the one that he found out about his burden from, accidentally of course. He read her mind on accident when she was thinking about it. And you think she could remain objective and train him properly? Hiruzen asked cautiously. I believe so. She didn't treat him like the others do, she treated him like she would anyone else, from what I can tell, Shisui said with a laugh as they both knew what they meant. Even Hiruzen cracked a smile as Anko's methods of toying with others was well known. Also, I believe that she could help him develop his abilities and fighting style. She fights similar to how he's learning to fight, though she's a bit more up close than he is, that could also work well. Hiruzen nodded in thought as he listened to Shisui. The younger man raised some very good points. However, there was the issue that Anko wasn't a full Junin, so this would need some thought. I see. Thank you for your honesty, Shisui-kun. I greatly appreciate it. Shisui stood and bowed to the Hokage, able to see the dismissal in his statement. Of course, Hokage-sama. About my application, Hiruzen nodded and pulled his pipe from his mouth. Report to Training Ground 11 in 3 days. You'll be tested and interviewed before a final decision is reached, but I have little doubt you will be selected for admission. Shisui smiled and bowed again. Thank you, Hokage-sama. With that, Shisui turned and left the office, leaving the Hokage to his thoughts. After a few hours of thinking and doing paperwork, Hiruzen let out a sigh and called for his secretary. Inform Mitarashi Anko that I wish to speak with her. XXXXXXX. Naruto yawned as he walked home from the academy, alone yet again. It had been almost 3 months since the incident with Danzo, and while he had kept himself busy discovering new ways to use his psionic energy and abilities, he was also feeling more alone than ever. Shisui had been accepted into Anbu, something that Naruto was again sworn to secrecy about. And Anbu was being kept extremely busy trying to do damage control, so both Shisui and Hawk were never around anymore. Naruto absently kicked a rock in his path, sending it flying down the road. He had tried to spend some time with Inoichi and his family, trying to find new control exercises as he had already mastered all the ones he had been taught, including water walking, but with how far apart he and Ino had fallen, it just felt more uncomfortable than usual being there. Especially as Ino had trouble talking about anything but Sasuke or ranting about Sakura. So, there he was, once again alone as he headed home. He was about to reach the fork in the road that would lead him home when he heard his name being called out. He looked around and smiled when he saw the Hokage walking towards him. Hokage Gigi, what are you doing here? Naruto called out as he hurried over to the old man. I was looking for you, actually, Hiruzen said with a kindly smile. How about some ramen? Naruto perked up at the mention of ramen and nodded quickly. Sure. Come on. There's a great place not too far from here. Hiruzen grinned at the hyperactive blonde doing a full 180 turn in attitude at the mention of ramen. He had seen the sad look on Naruto's face and was glad to see he could still be distracted. So, he followed Naruto to a small restaurant called Ramen Ichiraku, though Naruto usually just called it Ichiraku's. As they sat down on a pair of stools at the ramen bar, the owner, a kindly man named Tuki, and his daughter Ayame, came out to greet them. Hokage-sama, what an honor to have you here, Tuki said with a bow before turning to look at Naruto with a smile. And you, Naruto, where have you been? We haven't seen you in weeks. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly as he grinned at them. Sorry Tushi-Gigi, I've been really busy lately. Ayame, a very cute girl about 17, who had her long brown hair tied back into a loose ponytail to keep it out of her face, smiled at Naruto and turned to the Hokage first. What can we get for you today, Hokage-sama? I'll take one miso ramen, thank you, Hiruzen said with a smile at the young girl. And I'll take a pork ramen. Naruto exclaimed excitedly when Ayame turned to him. Of course you will, Ayame said with a laugh and winked at Naruto, causing him to flush red. She and her father got right to work on getting them their ramen, leaving the two of them to chat. Hiruzen grinned at Naruto when he saw him blush. Oh dear, is there something between you and our waitress, Naruto? He teased the young blonde. What? Oh, come on, Hokage Gigi, I'm way too young for her, Naruto said in denial, though he continued to blush a deep red. If you say so, Naruto, Hiruzen said with a wide grin. He missed spending time with the young boy, but his role as the leader of the village kept him too busy to spend a lot of time with him. Now, do you know why I wanted to see you, Naruto? No, but that's because I promised not to read people's minds unless necessary, Naruto said with a shrug and a grin, his blush fading away. Good lad, Hiruzen said with a nod. He knew that when Naruto made a promise, he did his best to keep it, no matter what. Well, do you remember what happened a few months ago? Naruto nodded, his enthusiasm dimming as he thought back to his firsts. Inoichi had taken some time to talk to him about what had happened, both as a friend and sort of father figure, and as his role as part of the T&I department. Naruto was privy to very sensitive information, and Inoichi had to make sure that he knew not to spread that information around. Yeah, I remember, Naruto said softly. Hiruzen placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, gently letting him know that he was there for him. Well, based on what happened, and from Shisui's report, I decided that what you did went far beyond what is expected of an academy student, and that deserves a proper reward, Hiruzen told Naruto with a gentle smile. They were interrupted by the arrival of their food, which Ayame placed in front of them, the girl ruffling Naruto's hair fondly as she passed him on her way back to the kitchen. Naruto gave Hiruzen an even look when he sensed the older man's amusement. Not a word, okay. Naruto said as he pointed his chopsticks at the Hokage before digging into his ramen. Hiruzen simply arched an eyebrow in amusement before picking up his own chopsticks and started on his ramen. The two of them shared a comfortable silence as they ate, each savoring the delicious flavor of their meal. Once they were finished, with Naruto taking a long moment to drain the broth from his bowl, Hiruzen placed some money down for their food before motioning for Naruto to come with him. Come again soon, Ayame called out to them, waving to Naruto when he turned to look at her as they left, causing the boy to blush again when he caught Hiruzen's teasing look. Hiruzen led Naruto towards the edge of the village, heading towards Training Ground 7, which Naruto liked to use simply as it was close to his apartment and there were several large wooden posts in the ground that he could use for practice, along with plenty of trees if he wanted to mix things up and add more interesting challenges for his practice. Now, as I said before, what you did proved that you have come further than I had ever expected, showing many traits that we value in our ninja. You showed grace under pressure, the ability to make difficult choices in tough situations, and a willingness to help someone even at great risk to yourself. The fact that you did all that and didn't receive as much as a scratch amazes and impresses me. You have proven yourself to be an exceptional Konoha ninja, and as such, you have proven yourself worthy of this uncommon honor, Hiruzen said to Naruto as they walked. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Naruto said as he discreetly wiped a tear away from his eye. I didn't do it for a reward, you know that right? I just did what needed to be done. I wasn't gonna let Shisui die just to protect my own life. Hiruzen smiled at the young blonde and patted him on the shoulder. I know, which is why I wanted to reward you with this, he said as he pulled out a storage scroll from his sleeve and handed it to Naruto. Naruto grinned as he took the scroll and started to open it. However, the Hokage stopped him before he could unseal anything. You can do that at home, Naruto. What is inside? There are various journals, scrolls, and other information about your mother, Uzumaki Kushina, the old man said softly. He had of course gone through and made sure that nothing in there revealed any other secrets he wasn't ready for Naruto to find out about yet. Naruto looked up at Hiruzen in shock, nearly dropping the scroll. Really? Wait a second, you told me that you would tell me about my mother when I graduated from the academy, and that's not for at least another year, Naruto said suspiciously. Hiruzen simply smiled at Naruto's paranoia, as continued to walk towards the training ground. I meant what I said then, and I am holding true to it now, Naruto. I promised to tell you about your mother when you graduated, and as of this afternoon, you are officially graduated from the academy, he told Naruto, who had to catch up after stopping in shock. What? How? Naruto almost shouted. Your assistance to Shisui fulfilled the practical application of ninja skills that students are judged on during the graduation exam, and over the last couple of weeks, the extra credit work that I had Iruka assign you served as the written portion of the exam. I received your final grade just before you were released for the day by Iruka, Hiruzen told the shocked boy. He reached into his other sleeve and pulled out a brand new Konoha Hitai 8, the forehead protector shining in the sunlight. He stopped and handed it to Naruto, who took it reverently. Congratulations, Naruto. I knew you would do me proud, but I'll admit that I never expected you to come so far so quickly. Naruto had to fight back the tears as he looked at the forehead protector in his hands, the physical proof of his new status as an official ninja of his village. Granted, there was a lot of paperwork that he knew he would have to fill out in the near future, but as of right now, he was filled with an unusual feeling, joy. He looked up at the Hokage, the tears he was fighting back filling his eyes, as he smiled at the old man. Thank you, so much. I promise I won't disappoint you, he said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. Hiruzen smiled at him and continued walking. I know you won't, which is why I found a slight loophole in your placement, As there are no genin teams with any openings, I have chosen to make you an apprentice to a more experienced ninja. Shisui, Naruto said hopefully as he tied his hitai around his forehead. The temptation to simply read Hiruzen's mind was getting harder to resist. Hiruzen shook his head, causing Naruto to frown slightly in disappointment. Unfortunately, his responsibilities prevent him from taking you on as an apprentice. However, I believe your new teacher will be a good fit for you and you for her, he said as they reached the training ground. Naruto looked around eagerly for his new teacher, wanting to meet the ninja that was going to help him become stronger and better, when he felt a sensation that he hadn't felt in months. He sensed a very familiar thought pattern behind him just as a kunai was pressed against his throat and he felt a pair of assets pressed against his back. Oh, not this again, Naruto thought in despair. Oh, Hokage-sama, you brought me a new toy to play with, Anko said in delight as she felt Naruto stiffen in her grasp. Hiruzen turned to look at where Anko had Naruto trapped in amusement, though he did his best to hide it. However, judging by the glare Naruto shot him, he didn't hide it well enough for the young psychic not to notice. Anko, I'd like to introduce you to your new apprentice, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto, your new sensei, Mitarashi Anko, Hiruzen formally introduced them, while fighting back a smile. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. What? Wait. Don't leave me alone with her. Naruto shouted as Hiruzen turned to leave. The Hokage simply waved to them as he walked away. Naruto glared at the Hokage's back, though there was no real heat behind it. Oh, Naruto, you don't want to spend time with little old me. Anko said with a purr of amusement. Not alone. Naruto snapped at her as he fought down a blush at her teasing. He struggled in her grip and eventually made his way free. Fortunately for him, Anko had put away her kunai before so he didn't cut himself. Anko took this chance to observe her first real student. She had never been given the chance to train someone before, due primarily to the mistrust in her based on her history with Orochimaru, so she had spent most of her time training, running solo missions, and helping in the torture and interrogation unit. Well, when she wasn't having fun, that is. Her first impression of him was of measured caution. He seemed to be very energetic, yet he also kept his awareness open, as shown by him sensing her come up behind him. Yet his body wasn't ready to move. If something happened right now, he'd be caught flat-footed and unprepared. He has too much confidence in his mental abilities. Overconfident idiot, she thought to herself, though she was surprised by the lack of reaction in him. Are you not reading my mind right now? She asked him curiously. Naruto shook his head in response. Nope. Inoichi made me promise not to go around reading people's minds. Him and the Hokage were worried about me finding out about the Kyuubi, but it was also about protecting other people's privacy and keeping me from being overwhelmed by too much information. Anko shook her head and pointed a finger at him. Okay, I want you to knock that out right now, she told him. In this world, privacy is a luxury we don't get to have. So from now on, I want you start doing your mind thing whenever you come across someone, including me. It just might save your life one day. Naruto frowned at her instructions but nodded hesitantly. He was a real ninja now, so he had to step up and deal with things that he didn't really want to. Anko grinned when she saw him nod. So, how does that work, brat? Do you pick up everything? Or just some things? Naruto rubbed his neck and shifted his weight from foot to foot. It's complicated. When I relax, I can pick up surface thoughts, just what a person is feeling or thinking at the moment, and usually within about 100 feet or so. If I focus, I can get better range and more information. Anko nodded as she listened to him. She could definitely use that to her advantage. With a psychic working with her, She could complete missions that would normally be impossible to pull off. What's more, she figured that when she was trying to teach him something, she could just have him look into her mind for the instructions and better details on how to do things. What else can you do? She asked him curiously. Naruto grinned at her, causing her to groan slightly. I told you how my telepathy works, so what can you do? What are you going to teach me? Naruto asked her with a smirk. Come on, sharing is caring, right? I'm going to cut you, brat, Anko growled as she pulled out a kunai. Oh, come on. What's first? Naruto asked her eagerly. First, I'm going to cut your right cheek, maybe turn your whiskers into a grid. Then I'll cut your left one, then I'm thinking of moving onto your hamstrings. See you try to walk home afterwards, she growled at him. However, he could feel that she wasn't completely serious, so he didn't take her threats too seriously. Come on, Anko-sensei, what am I going to learn? Naruto pushed her on this. Anko growled at how ineffective her usual threats were on the blonde ball of energy. Damn psychic, she thought to herself. She knew that Naruto was already following her orders when he winked at her in response. Fine. Shisui told me you two have been working on your own taijutsu style to complement your preference of using a bow and arrow to fight, so I'm going to help you polish that up and get you to the point where you won't yourself or me in a real fight, Anko told him as she spun her kunai on her finger. After that, well, we'll see. Now, what else can you do, brat? Naruto grinned at his victory. Alright. As you know, I'm really good with my bow, though I've put a lot of practice into other weapons. I rarely miss what I'm aiming at with anything I use. I'm not too bad with a tanto or kunai in close, he told her with a shrug. He had been trained by Shisui after all, and his preferred weapon was a tanto. I also recently discovered that I can do something unique and cool. There's another energy inside me that I can use, though I haven't gotten too good at it yet. What do you mean? What can it do? Anko asked him curiously. When she saw him grin wickedly, she suddenly got worried. When she saw his hand point towards her, that feeling got stronger. Naruto focused on his psionic energy and sent it towards Anko as a mild shock. A thin bolt of blue energy shot from his fingers and nearly hit her in the stomach, though she easily dodged it. A powerful feeling of dread came over Naruto when he saw her glare at him. What's the big idea, brat? Attacking your sensei on your first day? Anko snapped at him. She could feel that there was only a small amount of energy in that attack, but at the same time, it wasn't chakra-based either. Also, Naruto hadn't used any hand seals to channel the energy. So whatever it wasn't a jutsu and wasn't something she was familiar with. Hey, you wanted to see what I could do, Naruto said in his defense, holding up his hands in surrender. Anko narrowed her eyes at him but had to grudgingly admit she did leave herself open to that one. Plus, she remembered training with Orochimaru, and she had done far worse in her attempts to even lay a single finger on him. Alright, brat, I'll give you that one, she grumbled before brightening suddenly. Now it was Naruto's turn to get a bad feeling. Well, since you are so eager to get started, no time like the present. Time to work on your conditioning. What? Naruto yelped as she grabbed him and threw him towards a tree. He barely managed to twist in the air enough to land with his feet against the tree, sticking in place with his chakra. He looked at Anko, who suddenly was holding several kunai in her hands. Time for dodging practice, she said gleefully before throwing the kunai at him, one after another, causing Naruto to start dodging desperately in order to not get turned into a pin cushion. Naruto ran frantically from the clearing, with a madly cackling Anko close behind him. Naruto sighed as he shuddered in memory of the events of the day before. He had just left the Hokage's tower after spending some time filling out the paperwork needed to officially register him as a Genin-level ninja of Konoha. He was beyond happy that he no longer needed to go to the academy anymore, yet he was also sad. While he would advance and become the ninja he was meant to be, he was also leaving behind all his friends, who would still need to continue at the academy for another year. Naruto found his feet taking him to the Yamanaka flower shop, where he figured he'd find Ino and her dad working, as classes had already let out for the day. He was an adult now, seeing as he was a registered ninja, and he needed to act like one and stop avoiding his best friend just because she made him uncomfortable with her focusing on the Uchiha in their class. A bell rang as he entered the shop, the sound comforting him with its familiarity. However, the only person he saw in the shop was Inoichi, who was doing an inventory count. The older man looked over at Naruto with a smile when he saw the boy. "Naruto, it's been a while. How have you been?" Inoichi asked as he placed his clipboard down and focused on the young blonde. Over the years, he had come to view Naruto as part of his family, and he was always glad to see the boy. Naruto visibly brightened up as he walked closer to the only real father figure he'd had in his life. "That's actually why I'm here," he said excitedly as he leaned against the counter. He pulled out his Hitai-8 and placed it on the counter. The light glinted off the freshly polished metal. Inoichi looked at him with a frown as he noticed the Hitai-8 and he was about to scold Naruto for stealing another ninja's Hitai-8, but then he thought about who he was talking to. Naruto was many things, but he wouldn't do that, which meant. "They promoted you?" he asked as his eyes widened in surprise, as well as a little bit of fear for the boy. While it was normal for someone to be promoted early in times of war, it was almost unheard of in times of peace. The fact that Naruto of all people had gotten an early promotion was unexpected in the extreme, especially considering how many people still despised him for containing the Kyuubi. "Yeah, seems I really impressed the Hokage when I helped Shisui with Danzo, though I was just happy to get out of that alive," Naruto said with a wide grin as he slipped his Hitai-8 back into his pocket. He still wanted to surprise Ino and didn't want her to see it too soon. "By the way, where's Ino? I don't sense her anywhere nearby. I have to say, Naruto, I'm proud of you. You've become a remarkable ninja already, and I look forward to seeing what you can do," Inoichi said as he ruffled Naruto's hair. When Naruto just glared at him, his blue eyes gleaming, Inoichi sighed and rolled his eyes. All right, Ino said she was going to go shopping with one of her friends from class before coming home. I had thought she meant you, but. Naruto sighed and nodded his head sadly, his head dropping slightly. While that was something they used to do, they hadn't really hung out like that in months, and it looked like it wasn't likely going to happen any time soon as he was likely going to be very busy training with Anko. Inoichi came around the counter and placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder comfortingly before pulling the young boy into a hug. "Why don't you head towards the shopping district and see if you can find her? I bet she'll be just as excited for you as I am." "Thanks, Inoichi," Naruto said as he pulled away. He gave the older man a wide smile and a thumbs up before dashing out the front door. Inoichi just laughed and gave the excited youth a wave goodbye. Naruto headed towards the shopping section of town, keeping his senses open and searching for Ino. After getting there and looking around, ignoring all the dirty looks and sneered comments about him, he finally caught onto the feeling of her mind and used that to track her down. His range was slowly expanding, and he couldn't wait to see how far he could go with it. After dashing around several crowds, using the rooftops when necessary, Naruto almost literally ran into Ino as he turned a corner where she was walking in his direction. "Whoa. Hey Ino. I've been looking all over for you," Naruto exclaimed excitedly. He was practically bouncing in place. However, Ino was less than enthused about running into Naruto, especially as she had dropped a bag of clothes. What is it, Naruto? I need to get home and get changed, she said with a frown as she bent down and grabbed the dropped bag before she headed off in the direction of her house. Cool, I'll walk with you, Naruto said happily, his hands behind his head as he walked. He had to force himself not to pull out his Hitai too soon and ruin the surprise. Whatever, just don't slow me down, I'm in a hurry, Ino said with a sigh and an eye roll. She looked around to see if anyone was looking at them and she flinched when she saw a number of people staring at her walking with Naruto. Ino picked up her pace to get away from the people watching them and she was sure she could hear them start whispering and pointing at them. So, what's the big rush to get home? Naruto asked curiously as he easily kept pace with Ino. He knew that people were watching them, but he didn't really care about that anymore. He knew why they didn't like him now, and he refused to let them get him down with their stupidity. Ino looked at him with an annoyed expression. Sasuke is supposed to be working on some big jutsu with his brother Itachi and I want to go cheer him on, she told him in a terse tone. She looked around and let out a sigh of relief as they had gotten clear of the shopping district and there weren't any people that were staring at them anymore. Oh, I guess that's cool and all, Naruto said blandly, just waiting for the moment to tell her the big news. He stuck his hands in his pockets, his right hand curling around his Hitai. Cool. If Sasuke can pull off this jutsu, it'll mark him as an adult in his clan and that'll mean that he'll be able to start learning the more advanced techniques. He's so cool, Ino gushed, her eyes growing distant as she imagined Sasuke blowing out a huge fireball and then winking at her as the fireball turned into a heart. Hey, that reminds me, Naruto said as he saw a good lead-in. I've got some cool news of my own. He started to pull out his Hitai but stopped when Ino turned and glared at him. Oh, Naruto, I don't care about whatever prank you have planned, or whatever gossip you overheard by accident, Ino snapped at him as he broke her out of her daydream. Can't you see that Sasuke is about to do something truly amazing? No other Uchiha his age is even close to being able to perform this jutsu and he almost has it mastered. He's a prodigy of his clan, just like his brother. Naruto felt his heart drop as her obsession remained as strong as ever. He narrowed his eyes and couldn't stop a scoff from escaping. Please, Itachi is good, amazing even, but he's got nothing on Shisui. Shisui is the best of the best in the Uchiha clan, he told her, his pride forcing him to defend the man that had helped him so much over the years. He'd even seen Itachi and Shisui spar once and they were almost evenly matched. If he's so good, then why did he have to spend so long in the hospital after he got attacked? Ino said with a small sneer as she poked a hole in Naruto's argument. Itachi and Sasuke never would have ended up in the hospital like that, they're just too good. Hey, it's not Shisui's fault. That Danzo creep ambushed him with like 20 guys. Naruto exclaimed in defense of his hero. And he still managed to survive and keep them from taking his eyes. Naruto had to give Ino the official version of the story, as the Hokage wanted to keep his involvement secret for as long as possible to protect him. So that meant that he couldn't tell Ino just how much he had helped Shisui. Whatever, Ino said with a scoff as she flipped her hair and started back towards her home. Shisui is nothing compared to Itachi and Sasuke, just like you. You can't compete with Sasuke in class, so you wouldn't be able to compete with him in real life either. That's why I would rather hang out with him, or anyone else, instead of with you. Sasuke is gonna lead his clan one day, while you are just some clan-less loser with no one to care about you except a few people who only deal with you because they pity you. Naruto stopped in shock at hearing that, his heart breaking a little with each harsh word she said, and it wasn't just what she said verbally, but also what he was picking up from her mind and her emotions. She truly believed what she said, that he was nothing compared to Sasuke, that she didn't want anything to do with him. He had a brief glimpse into her mind and realized that all the times she had told him that she was too busy to hang out the last year, had just been excuses not to be seen with him. She had started to believe all the rumors that had been spread about him by the villagers, that he was worthless, that he would never amount to anything, that anyone hanging around him would be judged the same. So, she started distancing herself from him, started hanging out with other friends more and with him less and less. And now, she had taken a kunai to his heart with her words. Tears formed in his eyes, though he refused to let them fall. But he started to say but was cut off by Ino. She wouldn't even let him get a word in her hurry to get away from him. Go play ninja with someone else, Naruto. That's all you'll ever amount to after all. A pretend ninja, she said as she turned a corner, not bothering to look back at the heartbroken boy she left in her wake. His hitai dropping to the ground from his limp fingers. It took him several minutes to recover somewhat, and he slowly bent down and picked up his hitai, wrapping it around his forehead and wiping his eyes of the tears that had formed with a soft sniffle. He turned the other direction and started walking, not bothering to care about where he was going. After a while, he slowly came back to his senses and found himself on top of the Hokage monument, standing on the head of the Yondaime Hokage. Naruto dropped to the ground and looked out over the whole of Konoha, his mind and emotions a mess. He still hadn't fully dealt with the lives he had taken before, and then this mess blows up in his face. In just a year, his entire world had been flipped, tossed around, and then pureed in a blender. He didn't know who he was anymore. Maybe Ino was right, maybe he would never amount to anything, but then again, he was only 11 and he had his whole life ahead of him. Naruto pulled out a picture of his mother, Kushina, and looked at her with a sad smile. She had apparently given her life to protect him, according to the Hokage, and if he didn't do the absolute best he could, then he would be disrespecting her sacrifice. She was beautiful and full of life in the picture he had of her, and yet she had willingly given up everything for him, to make sure he had a future. She had loved him, he knew that with absolute certainty. I promise you, Mom, and whoever my dad was, I promise you both, that I won't ever give up or let others tell me who or what I am, he said with a watery smile as he watched the sunset, tears rolling down his cheeks as he made his vow. I'll do my best to make you both proud of me. Naruto stayed up there on the mountain until long after night fell, looking out over the village and watching the stars. XXXXXXX. Naruto met with Anko the next day, still a bit down from what Ino had said, and not said, to him. It was enough that Anko remarked about it to him. Hey, brat, what's with the long face? Usually you're bouncing off the walls, but today you can't even smile, she said as she munched on a stick of dango. She swung her legs under her as she sat up on a tree branch above him. Usually I'm bouncing off the walls to avoid the kunai and senbon you throw at me, Naruto muttered as he sat down at the base of the tree. He yelped in pain as Anko threw the dango skewer in her hand at him, the stick stabbing into his leg. Hey, fine, if you gotta be so nosy, my oldest and first friend told me yesterday that she thinks I'm worthless, that I'll never amount to anything. He glared up at the older woman before looking back down at the ground, pulling the stick out of his leg absently. Well, boo-hoo, Anko said sarcastically as she dropped to the ground with barely a sound. Want me to get you a blanket and a pacifier? Maybe a nice glass of warm milk? I certainly ain't going to change your freaking diaper. She grabbed him by his shirt and pulled him to his feet. Alright, brat, listen up. The moment you put on that Hittite you became a soldier of Konoha, not some snot-nosed brat that needs his hand held and someone to tell him he's special. She poked him on his forehead protector. So what if she thinks you aren't worth shit? That just goes to show how little she knows, she snapped at him. Naruto was staring at her wide-eyed as she scolded him worse than he had been in ages. Plus, her emotions were hitting him hard too, all of them backing up her words and thoughts. The freaking Hokage himself thought that you were a good enough ninja to be promoted without going through the last year of the academy. You think he does that for just anyone? No. You think that your little friend knows better than the Hokage? You better believe she doesn't know anything. So, who are you gonna put your faith in? Huh? Some brat that is obsessed with the Uchiha? Or the leader of the entire village? Anko crossed her arms across her chest, incidentally enhancing her bust, as she stared Naruto down. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Well, when you put it that way, it does seem pretty silly, Naruto said with a nervous laugh. Good. Now, if we have to have this conversation again, blood is gonna be spilled, got it? Anko said dangerously as she ran her finger along the edge of a kunai. Naruto nodded fervently, fully aware that she wasn't bluffing at the moment. Well, now that that's settled, got some tests for you, she said happily as she pulled out a notebook from her jacket. Ah, man, I thought I was done with tests, Naruto whined in dismay as he kicked the ground in frustration. Not those sorts of test, brat, Anko said as she smacked him on the head with her notebook. After the Hokage asked me to train you, I went and did some research on what little is known about psychics, both fiction and nonfiction. And I gotta tell you, kid, there is a lot of mixed up messages being thrown around about psychic abilities. As I'm sure you know, there hasn't been a documented case of someone with your abilities ever. So, I'm pretty much throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks here, okay? Naruto nodded and moved a step away from Anko in case she decided to hit him again, though he knew she could throw things at him with deadly accuracy, so it didn't help too much. So, what first? He asked, biting his lip in anticipation. Anko opened her notebook to a page and started listing things off. Okay, so we got empathy and telepathy already shown and developed. Just need more practice and range on that, she said as she made a tick mark on the page. Hokage-sama told me that you found Shisui by following echoes. Yeah, I came across a clearing in the woods and saw a mental echo of him getting ambushed in the recent past and followed the echoes until I found him, Naruto told her with a shrug. He didn't really understand the ability but figured it could possibly be kinda cool in some ways. Anko looked at him over her book with a deadpan expression. Brat, that's called psychometry, and it means you have the ability to look into an object or location's past and see what happened to it. We are definitely gonna be working on that, she told him with a shake of her head as she made a few notes in her book. Why? What's so cool about that? He asked her, not really understanding why she thought it was so important. It was pretty much just like watching a movie or something, and it wasn't always interesting to him about what was going on. Kid, imagine if you are sent to find out what happened to someone. A normal person has to go to the location, search for clues, spend hours, days, or weeks investigating everything that happened, and hopefully figure out the truth, Anko told him seriously, her hand twitching as she fought the urge to stab him with her pen. With you, all you gotta do is show up, feel out the echo, and then bam. You know just what happened and you can cut out tons of the boring bullshit and maybe save someone's life or avenge them before the bad guy gets away. Naruto blinked in surprise as he had never thought of it that way. Oh, I guess that's pretty cool after all, he said meekly. As she had been explaining it to him, She had been thinking in her mind about similar situations she had personally dealt with that would have turned out differently had she been able to do what he could. As he had found out himself, that ability could save lives. Moving on, Anko said with a sigh, resisting the urge to smack the blonde boy. Next we got telekinesis. That's always showing up in the stories about psychics. The ability to move things with just your mind, she explained to him. Oh, kinda like what I do with my arrows. Naruto exclaimed as his eye widened a little, happy to be able to add something to the discussion. Yeah, exactly. Now, Shisui and Hawk both say you almost never miss with your arrows, yet your accuracy with your kunai and shuriken aren't as good. So what gives, brat? Anko said curiously. She purposely tried to call him a brat every chance she could as she knew it bothered him and his eye twitched when she did. Naruto considered his words carefully. Well, when I make a shot with my bow, I focus on the arrow and where it's going, and when it's released, I can just feel it and I know whether it's gonna hit or not. If I know it's gonna miss, I try and nudge it with my mind, he told her after a minute. It's hard to explain, it's just something I do, and I don't really think about it. Anko frowned in thought and looked at him with narrowed eyes. And you don't have that same feeling with your kunai? Well, generally when I'm throwing kunai, I do it a lot faster than when I shoot an arrow. I take less time to prepare, plus my target is usually a lot closer, he told her with a shrug. His accuracy with his kunai and shuriken was still really good, almost as good as Sasuke's, and loads better than anyone else in their class. Anko put away her notebook and held up a kunai, placing it flat on her palm and holding it slightly away from her body. Okay, brat, seems this is an important skill that you have been neglecting. Time to change that, she told him sternly. I want you to nudge the kunai, got it? Naruto gave her a confused look before focusing on the kunai, trying to replicate the feeling he got with his arrows. But he was having trouble, as with the arrows he was touching them, feeling them with his senses as well as his mind. The kunai wasn't just much further away, it was being held by someone else. It was as if it didn't even exist to his senses, except for sight. Naruto stared at the kunai, trying desperately to move it, to get it to do anything. He narrowed his eyes in concentration, and he could feel his face flush with exertion from the strain. He was about to give up when he felt a flicker of sensation and saw the kunai shift slightly as his mind brushed against it. He focused on that feeling, blocking out everything except for trying to repeat that same sensation. His entire focus and will were thrown into moving the kunai, and with a wordless roar of effort, he felt that same sensation flare inside his mind, and the kunai shot from Anko's hand and buried itself into a tree right up to the ring at the end of the kunai. Naruto collapsed to his knees as he felt utterly drained, and he had to blink away stars that appeared in his vision after straining his mind so hard. That was tough, he muttered tiredly, fighting the urge to just fall asleep. He blinked a few times and the tiredness he was feeling started to fade quickly. Anko looked at him, then to her now empty hand, and then to the small ring of metal sticking out of the tree, all that could be seen of the kunai. Damn, kid, I just asked you to move it, not to send it into the next country, she muttered in surprise. Ideas started to form in her mind of things that Naruto would be able to do eventually, and an evil grin formed on her face. Unfortunately for Naruto, he was too tired and distracted to pick up these thoughts, or else he would have been very scared at what lay in his future. I couldn't get a feel for it, not like I could with an arrow, Naruto told her as he shook his head to clear the cobwebs. Maybe if I had been holding it, it would have been easier, but with you holding the kunai, I had nothing to get a feel for it with. I guess maybe I used a little too much power, he said sheepishly. Anko nodded and took out her notebook and made a few notes. She then shut it and put it away. Okay, the next two are kinda odd and hard to test, so just gonna ask you if you've ever had anything like them happen to you, Anko said with an upbeat tone. Naruto just sighed and gave a noncommittal shrug. Okay, have you ever seen dead people or seen the future? Naruto just gave her a blank look. No, and no, I didn't even think those were possible, he told her blandly, though he gave a small shiver at the thought of seeing dead people. Well, like I said, hard to test, but I'll figure something out. Now, the last one on my list, and I'm sure I missed something, I only had a couple days to prepare, was something called pyrokinesis. It means you can control fire, Anko told him helpfully, though her smirk and her emotions revealed how much she was enjoying this. Naruto actually started grinning at the thought. Wait, you mean control fire with just my mind? That would be awesome. Can you imagine someone trying to use a Kaden jutsu against me and then I just turn it around on them? That would be so freaking cool. Naruto just about shouted in excitement. He couldn't wait to try that particular ability and he really hoped he had it. Anko just sighed and added a few more notes to her book. Well, like I said, that does it for my list, but I can tell we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. Wait, what about my other ability? Naruto asked her, cutting her off mid-sentence, earning him a glare from her. You know, the one where I almost shocked you. Yeah, I had forgotten about that, Anko said as she scratched her chin with her pen. Well, I didn't read anything about that, but we can work on that too. If you can use that energy as an attack, maybe you can do other things with it. She tried not to be too encouraging in case nothing came of it. She shut her notebook with a snap and tucked it away in her coat pocket. Okay, brat, you look a little tired, so we aren't going to start training right now, she told him, grinning at his sigh of relief, which caused him to tense up as he caught what she was thinking. As he tried to make a run for it, she snagged him by the back of his shirt and lifted him off the ground. Yup, no apprentice of mine is gonna go around looking like you do right now, she told him happily as she started dragging him back into town and towards the shopping district. You are getting a new wardrobe, kid. I hope you brought your wallet as I ain't paying. XXXXXXX. Naruto glared at Anko as he tugged at his new shirt. He hadn't had too much in the way of choices as she pretty much handed him clothes and told him to go change. He had put his foot down on a few things, but overall, he just went with her choices. In the end, he ended up with an armored mesh shirt like hers, with a black hooded jacket that was made of some kind of reinforced fabric that was supposed to be very durable yet easy to clean. The jacket alone cost most of his money, but he still had enough for multiple shirts as well as a few new pants that were made of a similar fabric to his jacket but were much less expensive. Wrapping off the look was a new pair of black combat boots, though when he found that they cost more than he had with him, he was happily going to put them back. However, Anko saw him doing that and marched him up to the counter with them. She loaned him the money needed to get them, saying that she'd make sure he paid her back as he needed them to complete his new look. The only thing he was able to get that he wanted was a dark orange belt, as they didn't have anything brighter that was in orange, his favorite color. While he liked blue, considering that he had blue crystals all over his bedroom and had one hanging around his neck, there was just something about orange that called to him. But the only thing orange he could afford after Anko's purchases using his money was the belt, and even she had to admit that it went well with his new outfit. The only problem had been when they went to check out. The clerk had taken one look at Naruto and threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. Naruto had been willing to go with it, he wasn't looking to cause trouble, but Anko wasn't having any of it. By the time she was done with the clerk, not only had she gotten an apology from him, but they had gotten a nice discount as well. So, there he was, his clothes fresh off the rack, and they were back at the training ground they had been at before. Naruto was still pouting as he itched absently from his new clothes. I liked my clothes, he muttered crossly. Well, those were the clothes of an academy student, and guess what, you aren't anymore, Anko said cheerfully, continuing on without letting him reply. That's right, you aren't an academy student now, you're a real ninja, so it's time you look like one. Now that you're recovered, it's time to work on your training. Naruto just let out a low groan as he followed behind his crazy sensei. He had no idea that being an actual ninja would be so exhausting, and they hadn't even gone on an actual mission yet. But he did as he was told, and he knew that she wouldn't lead him wrong, especially after what he had managed to glean from her mind earlier. So, Anko-sensei, he spoke up as they got to a clearing and she started him on warm-up exercises to help break in the new clothes. When were you planning on telling me that you were bribed into training me? Anko actually almost tripped from his question and turned to look at him in shock. You did tell me to scan other people's minds, including your own, he reminded her. Letting out a long sigh, Anko motioned for him to keep stretching. Well, to be honest, I had hoped not to have to tell you, but since you dug a bit deeper than I had thought you would, I'll be straight with you, she told him as she leaned against a tree and threw Senbon at him randomly to test his reflexes. As you may or may not know, I'm not exactly the most trusted person in Konoha, even though I've been a loyal ninja for years and have done a lot of good around here. No one cares due to who my sensei was, Orochimaru, the traitor. She sighed and threw another Senbon at him, almost nailing him in the leg as he dodged it. Anyway, due to him training me, people tend to lump me in with him, and so I've been stuck as a Tokubetsu Junin for years, despite me being good enough for a promotion to full Junin. When the Hokage asked me to train you, yeah, he said that when I get you to Chunin, he'll make sure I get promoted as well. So, is that the only reason you decided to train me? Naruto asked as he ducked under another Senbon and immediately dodged another two by rolling to the left. Nah, you impressed me that first time we met, she told him with an absent wave of her hand. Figured that if the Hokage thought you learning from me was a good idea, then maybe there was something special about you. The promotion is just a bonus. Naruto nodded as that was along what he had figured from his glimpse into her mind earlier. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, she said with a grin that sent chills down his spine, I want you to hit me, if you can. Naruto gulped as he took a loose stance as she pulled out a kunai and lovingly caressed it. Before he could grab his bow from where it was leaning against a tree along with his quiver, Anko was on him, sending a fist at his face. As he ducked under the strike, he was forced to dive away as she spun around and slashed at him with her kunai. Naruto frantically backpedaled away from his teacher and unrelenting attacks. He had a sudden glimpse of her next attack and moved just before she did, dodging around her slash and sending a quick kick towards her open stomach. However, her free hand flashed through the air and grabbed his leg, and with a vicious grin, she threw him across the clearing. Not bad, brat, but not good enough, Anko said with a laugh. She threw her kunai at him, causing him to roll away and jump to his feet. It's not fair, you're too fast. Naruto protested as he rapidly looked around for anything that could help him. Too bad, little boy. Guess you'll just have to get faster, Anko said with no sympathy as he rushed at him and delivered a brutal two-punch combo to his sides before snapping his head back with a kick. Naruto hit the ground hard, but he had the presence of mind to roll away as a knee impacted right where his stomach had been seconds before. Naruto got to his feet and wiped away a thin trail of blood from where he had bitten his lip from her kick. But he had barely done that when Anko was right in front of him and raining blows on his body. He put his hands up to protect his face, but she ignored that and hit him in multiple tender spots, choosing her strikes carefully to do maximum pain but with minimum damage. One strike was to his groin, and when he clutched himself in pain, she struck him in the face and throat in punishment. After several more seconds of striking him, Anko stepped back and let him collapse to the ground. Bah, if that's the best you can do, maybe I shouldn't waste my time and just send you back to the academy, Anko said scathingly. She headed away from him with a disgusted look on her face. Wait, Naruto shouted, his voice hoarse from an earlier strike to the throat as he was falling to the ground. I'm not done yet. He struggled to his feet, barely able to stand through the massive pain his body was feeling. Look at you, you're one strong breeze away from falling on your. It's over, Anko scoffed, though she stopped and turned to look at him over her shoulder. Naruto couldn't disagree with her, but his eyes caught the gleam of reflected sunlight off the kunai Anko had thrown at him earlier, it being lodged in the ground behind her, and he had an idea. He held his hand out towards her, focusing all his might on trying to summon the kunai to him. What? Are you trying to choke me with your mind? Please, don't be even more of an idiot than normal, Anko said with an eye roll as she turned to face him. Naruto ignored her words and used all the tricks he had learned over the years from Inoichi to focus past the pain, to ignore it in favor of his task. His eyes narrowed as he saw the kunai move slightly and grinned as his eyes shifted up to look at Anko. He gave her a foxy grin as with a surge of mental effort, he pulled the kunai from the ground. The kunai flew to his hand, but catching it proved to be the last straw and he fell to the ground in a heap. The last thing he saw before he passed out was a thin line of blood on the edge of the kunai. XXXXXXX. When Naruto woke up later, he found that he had been moved into the shade of one of the trees that bordered the clearing, and his jacket had been rolled up to provide a pillow for him. He groaned in pain as he slowly sat up, though he noticed that the pain was much less than it was before he passed out. I was wondering when you would wake up, lazybones, Anko said smugly as she munched on a stick of dango. Naruto's eyes were immediately drawn to a bandage that wrapped around her left leg as she sat nearby him. You took too long to remember about that kunai, brat. We're gonna need to work on your situational awareness. You planned that from the beginning? Naruto asked in surprise as he scooted back against the tree. Then why did you beat me up so much? 'Cause it was fun, Anko replied with a shrug. Plus, you needed some toughening up. Still do. She finished off the dango and tossed the stick away nonchalantly. Not to mention it was a good chance to show you personally my style of taijutsu. If I have to fight someone, I go for their vital and weak points. Forget going toe-to-toe with someone, trading punches until someone loses. I'd rather put them down hard and fast before they know what's happening, all while avoiding anything they send at me. Naruto nodded as he gingerly touched the spots she had hit him. If she had been holding a weapon, each blow would have hit something vital. Some would have been instant shots, while others would have slowed him down or caused him to slowly bleed to death. I see. Anko grinned at him before lifting herself off the ground with her hands, keeping her legs crossed, before slowly unfolding her legs and rotating her body so that her face was almost touching the ground. She then moved into a handstand before letting her feet fall over her head until they touched the ground before shifting her weight onto her feet and standing up. It was a ridiculous and impractical way to stand up, but she had done it for one unspoken purpose. You did that to show me how flexible you are, Naruto said in a deadpan voice, though the furious blush on his face showed how much he had enjoyed that display. Exactly, Anko told him with a wink when she saw his blushing face. And guess what? You'll be just as flexible by the time I'm done with you. You heal fast, but why bother even getting hit in the first place when you can just dodge the attack? When we mix my snake style with your bojutsu and kyujutsu, if anyone manages to get past your arrows, thinking that they'll have an easier time fighting you up close like most ranged fighters, you'll be able to make them pay for their mistakes. Anko then turned serious. Now, you currently have one major flaw that I highlighted in our spar, she said, ignoring his scoff at her calling his beating a spar. In case you weren't paying attention, without your bow or any of the weapons you've gotten used to, you were useless. You've spent so much time focusing on your weapon skills, that you've forgotten to develop your unarmed taijutsu skills. That's gonna be the first thing I'm working with you on for taijutsu. Naruto sighed and laid back on the ground. He had a very strong feeling that things were going to for him for a long while. He winced as Anko, lightly, kicked him in the side. Come on, lazy bones. We're wasting daylight here, she told him cheerfully. Iruka sighed heavily as he marked yet another homework assignment from his class. While he was deeply grateful for the Hokage granting him the opportunity to teach, he had come to cherish the bonds he forged with his students and valued the personal growth this role had brought him. He couldn't deny that the less glamorous side of the job, namely the endless paperwork, often drove him to frustration. Grading assignments, planning lessons, submitting reports to the academy, and balancing these tasks alongside his duties as a chunin was enough to make him want to scream some days. Still, he soldiered on, his sense of duty and love for teaching keeping him grounded. Having fun, Iruka? The familiar voice startled him out of his thoughts. He glanced up from the mess of papers scattered across his desk to see Mizuki leaning casually against the doorframe. Iruka's face lit up with genuine surprise and delight. Mizuki, what are you doing here? He pushed aside his paperwork without a second thought, rising to greet his old friend. Last I heard, you were leading a squad on the border of Rice Country. Mizuki grimaced as he stepped forward to embrace Iruka in a brotherly hug before pulling back with a shrug. I was, he admitted, his tone laced with frustration. But there was an incident on our last mission. I lost one of my team members, and now T is reviewing the mission report to figure out what went wrong. Iruka's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry to hear that, he said sincerely, his voice tinged with concern. He and Mizuki had known each other since their academy days, and Iruka was well aware of Mizuki's ambition to rise through the ranks. Losing a team member would have been a devastating blow, both personally and professionally. So, where have they reassigned you in the meantime? Iruka asked, genuinely curious. Mizuki smirked, though there was a trace of bitterness in the expression. Right here, actually. You're looking at your new teaching assistant for next term. He let out a humorless chuckle. Guess they figured this would be a good way to keep me out of trouble. Iruka laughed, clapping his friend on the shoulder. Come on, Mizuki. It might not seem like much at first, but this is an incredible opportunity. Teaching these kids is an honor, an important responsibility. You'll see, it's not just about showing them how to throw a kunai. We get to shape the next generation of shinobi, influence them during one of the most critical times in their lives. Trust me, you'll come to love it. Mizuki rolled his eyes, his disdain barely concealed. To him, greatness was found on the battlefield, earning fame and power through dangerous missions, not wasting time in a classroom full of children. But he kept those thoughts to himself for now. Instead, he decided to steer the conversation in a different direction. So, Mizuki began, his tone casual but with a sharp edge, how's it been, teaching the demon brat? Any trouble from it? The room seemed to grow colder as Iruka paused, sorting through a stack of papers he had planned to give Mizuki to familiarize him with the academy's routines. Slowly, he turned, fixing Mizuki with a steely gaze that carried none of the warmth from earlier. I would rather you not talk about Naruto that way, Mizuki, Iruka said evenly, his voice firm and unwavering. Not only is there a law against speaking about him like that, but Naruto has proven himself time and again. He's not the beast he carries within him. He's a fine shinobi in the making and a worthy legacy of the fourth Hokage. Mizuki blinked, momentarily caught off guard by Iruka's staunch defense of the boy. Clearly, there was more to this situation than Mizuki had anticipated. If Naruto was as significant as Iruka made him sound, then he might be worth paying closer attention to, especially considering Mizuki's recent agreement to assist Orochimaru in gathering intelligence on Konoha. Adopting a more conciliatory tone, Mizuki raised his hands in a placating gesture. You're right, Iruka. I spoke out of turn. I suppose there's a lot I don't understand about the boy or the situation. He hesitated before adding with forced enthusiasm, why don't I treat you to dinner? You can tell me more about teaching, and about Naruto. Though Iruka caught the faint grimace Mizuki tried to suppress, he decided to let it slide. Mizuki had apologized, and Iruka hoped the job would eventually change his friend's perspective. All right, Iruka said with a sigh, grabbing his coat and a stack of papers he planned to review later. But it might take a while, there's a lot to cover. Let's go. As the two men left the academy, Mizuki's mind raced with possibilities. If Naruto truly carried the legacy of the fourth Hokage, then he was more important than Mizuki had initially realized. And that meant he could be the key to fulfilling Orochimaru's plans. The next morning, Iruka met Mizuki at the academy, both nursing mild hangovers from their drinks the night before. Mizuki leaned casually against the classroom doorframe, his arms crossed as he watched Iruka wrangle his notoriously unruly class into submission. All right, settle down, Iruka said firmly, his voice cutting through the chatter. Most of the students began quieting, but Kiba Inuzuka was still busy entertaining himself, laughing at Akamaru's antics under the desk. I said settle down, Iruka barked, stepping up to Kiba's desk. The shout startled the boy so badly that he jumped in his seat, banging his knees painfully on the desk's underside. Ow! Damn it! Kiba yelped, clutching his knees and cursing under his breath. Detention after class, Kiba, Iruka said with a smirk, his tone light but firm as he turned back to the front of the room. He ignored Kiba's indignant glare with the ease of someone well accustomed to the boy's antics. As the chaos of the classroom gradually subsided, Mizuki let his mind wander back to the conversation he and Iruka had shared over beers the night before. I still don't get it, Mizuki said, frowning as the bartender refilled their drinks. How can you defend the beast after what it took from you? Iruka sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass before taking a sip. Trust me, if Naruto was actually the beast he carries, I wouldn't be able to defend him. And honestly, neither would the rest of the village, none of us would still be alive, not after everything he's endured. Mizuki arched a skeptical brow. That's a pretty dramatic take, don't you think? Not at all, Iruka replied sharply. Just because you seal a kunai into a scroll doesn't mean the scroll is the kunai. Naruto's had more hardships than ninja 3 times his age, and instead of breaking, he's risen to the challenge. He's become a fine shinobi despite everything the village has done to him. He paused, downing a long drink before setting the glass back on the bar. And that's without even considering his curse or his other gifts. Mizuki's curiosity was piqued, though his expression remained neutral. Gifts. And you talk about him like he's already a ninja. Isn't he still in the academy? Iruka chuckled, setting his beer down before it could spill. I can't say much about his gifts, that's clan business now. But as for the rest, Naruto's already earned his promotion. He saved another ninja's life and showed the Hokage he was ready. That kid's a true shinobi, not like that Uchiha brat. Mizuki blinked at the sudden bitterness in Uruka's tone. You mean Sasuke? What's wrong with him? He's talented, isn't he? Uruka snorted derisively. Talent isn't enough. Sasuke's arrogant. He thinks being an Uchiha entitles him to everything on a silver platter. Naruto, on the other hand, everything he's got, he earned. There's no comparison. Mizuki nodded absently, mentally filing away every word Uruka said. Orochimaru would be interested in these details, especially about Naruto. The two men had stayed out late, catching up and drinking far more than they should have. Now, Mizuki observed Uruka's classroom, intrigued to see his friend in action. Uruka had just finished distributing packets of papers to his students. You're all about to start your summer break, your last break before your final year at the academy, he announced, his tone serious. Your final year will be the hardest, so I expect all of you to study hard and practice your skills over the break. Sensei. The timid voice brought Uruka up short. He turned, surprised to see Hinata Hyuga standing hesitantly beside her desk. It had taken the girl an entire week to summon the courage to speak up in front of the class. Yes, Hinata, Uruka asked, his voice softening. The shy heiress poked her fingers together nervously. Naruto hasn't been to class for a while, and no one knows what happened to him. Can you tell us where he is? Uruka smiled gently but shook his head. I'm sorry, Hinata, but Naruto is no longer a student here at the academy. That's why he hasn't been in class. If you want more details, only the Hokage or Naruto himself can tell you. The news sent a ripple of whispers through the classroom. Sakura leaned toward Ino, curiosity lighting her features. Did you know about this, Ino? Ino paled slightly at the revelation. A pang of guilt twisted in her chest as she remembered her harsh words to Naruto. Had her rejection driven him to quit? She pushed the thought away, masking her unease with indifference. Know what? She said coolly. That Naruto finally realized he'd never make it as a ninja and dropped out. No, I don't talk to him anymore. Her dismissive tone unnerved the girls around her. They exchanged uneasy glances, the coldness in her words a stark contrast to how she had once defended Naruto fiercely. Uruka clapped his hands sharply, restoring order. Class, quiet, he barked. You'll have plenty of time to gossip later. Right now, we have work to do. He gestured toward Mizuki, who stepped forward with a polite bow. This is Mizuki-sensei. He'll be assisting me over the summer and next school year. I expect you all to show him the same respect you give me. While most of the students acknowledged Mizuki with polite nods, Hinata sat frozen, the packet of papers clutched tightly to her chest. Naruto had left the academy. It didn't make sense. Naruto never gave up on anything. That determination was one of the things she admired most about him. So why wasn't he here anymore? As the class was dismissed for the summer, Hinata walked home slowly, her thoughts consumed by Naruto's absence. The papers in her hands felt heavier with each step, her heart aching with unanswered questions. Well, look at what we have here, a lost little Hyuga. The voice, dripping with mockery, startled Hinata, and she spun around in surprise, nearly losing her balance. Her heart raced as she looked up to find two girls and a boy from her class standing behind her. They were part of the group that had teased her relentlessly over the years, though they had usually left her alone outside the academy. That they were bothering her now, away from the watchful eyes of the teachers, filled her with dread. What do you want? She stammered, instinctively stepping back. We just thought we'd check on you, seeing how upset you were about Naruto dropping out, the lead girl said, her voice falsely sweet. She exchanged a sly glance with the others, their smiles more like predatory grins than signs of concern. Hinata flushed with embarrassment, feeling both anger and shame surge through her. Naruto would never drop out, she said, but immediately regretted the outburst. She averted her gaze, her face burning. Oh, does someone have a little crush on the failure? The boy sneered, stepping forward with a mocking swagger. Well, I guess failures like to stick together. Without warning, he shoved her hard in the chest, sending her stumbling backward and crashing to the ground with a sharp yelp. Why don't you follow his example and quit? You'll never be a real ninja. You're too weak. The sound of cruel laughter filled the air, the other two joining in as Hinata's eyes stung with the threat of tears. Pain bloomed in her knees and hands, but it was the words that hurt the most. They were right, weren't they? She wasn't strong enough, not like her father demanded, and certainly not like the others. She was weak. She could never match the likes of Naruto. The thought of quitting, of giving up, clung to her like a heavy, suffocating weight. But how could she? She couldn't let her family down. She had to keep going. But where did that leave her? What was she supposed to do? Leave her alone. The sudden, familiar voice cut through her thoughts, a beacon of reassurance. Hinata's eyes widened in surprise and relief as she looked up to see Naruto dropping down from the roof of the nearby building, his expression fierce and determined. He landed in front of her, facing the bullies with a glare that could cut through stone. Hinata felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest at the sight of him standing up for her, her heart pounding in a way that made her forget her own pain. The bullies froze, clearly taken aback. Naruto's stance was aggressive, his body taut with the promise of a fight. I suggest you three beat it, he warned, his voice cold and steady. Or else I'll remind you the hard way that none of you have ever beaten me in a spar, when I was holding back. The bullies shared nervous looks, and in an instant, their bravado evaporated. They turned and fled, their laughter replaced by the sound of their hurried footsteps. Naruto scoffed in disgust, his eyes following them as they disappeared into the distance. He turned back to Hinata, his expression softening. You okay, Hinata? They didn't hurt you, did they? His tone was gentle as he extended his hand to her, a reassuring smile on his face. Hinata, still in a daze from both the encounter and Naruto's sudden appearance, found herself blushing furiously. She hadn't expected him to step in like that, let alone offer her his hand. The warmth in her chest deepened as she hesitantly took it, letting him help her to her feet. Anyo, I'm fine, Naruto-kun, she mumbled softly, still overwhelmed by his kindness. Naruto scratched the back of his neck awkwardly, a bright grin lighting up his face. Ah, no need to be so formal, Hinata, he chuckled. I'm just glad I could help. With that, he turned to walk away, seemingly eager to get some ramen, his favorite indulgence, before heading home. Wait, Naruto, Hinata blurted out, her voice small but insistent. Her heart skipped a beat as he stopped and turned back to her, his expression curious. She felt her face burn hotter under his gaze, her thoughts scrambling as she tried to find the right words. What is it, Hinata? Are you sure you're okay? Your face is really red, Naruto said with concern, though his genuine care only seemed to make her more flustered. Hinata swallowed hard, trying to gather her courage. She hesitated, then finally took a deep breath, her voice barely more than a whisper. I heard today that you aren't in the academy anymore, she murmured, hiding her face behind her hair. You didn't drop out, did you? Naruto blinked, momentarily confused. He peered into her thoughts for a moment, his eyes softening with understanding. He grinned broadly and let out a soft chuckle. Nah, I didn't drop out, Hinata, he said, his voice light. I got promoted to genin. Did something really cool, and the old man thought I was ready for it. Hinata blinked, her eyes wide in awe. She believed him completely, but a pang of doubt still lingered in her heart. How could she ever be as strong as him? He was already so far ahead, so far beyond what she could even imagine for herself. Yet, despite her inner turmoil, a flicker of resolve burned inside her. She might never be on his level, but she would work as hard as she could. She wouldn't be left behind. One day, she would stand beside him, head held high, strong enough to call herself a true ninja. Hey, Hinata, Naruto interrupted her thoughts, his voice pulling her back to the present. How about I walk you home? Don't want those losers coming back to bother you. Hinata's blush returned full force at his suggestion, but she smiled shyly, her heart fluttering in her chest. Oh okay, she stammered, nodding as Naruto fell into step beside her. The two walked in comfortable silence toward the Hyuga compound, their steps in sync. Neither of them noticed the pair of blue eyes watching them from a distance, filled with a mix of guilt and sadness. The figure turned away, walking in the opposite direction, lost in their own thoughts. Oh 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 oh. An old man walked through the crumbling remains of an abandoned temple, the dim light filtering through cracks in the stone ceiling casting eerie patterns on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and the faint drip of water echoed ominously in the silence. Shimura Danzo moved deliberately, his cane tapping against the uneven stone floor with every step. Behind him, two younger men, members of his loyal Root faction, followed silently, their wary eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. Danzo had seen better days. The weight of exile bore heavily on him, his body showing signs of wear from his flight from Konoha. Yet, his resolve remained unshaken. He had not survived decades of intrigue and war to be undone now. Konoha might have cast him out, but he was not finished, not yet. The temple, hidden deep in the wilderness far from any village, was one of many meeting places Danzo had cultivated over the years. Its walls were adorned with faded murals depicting forgotten gods and ancient rituals, a haunting reminder of its long-abandoned purpose. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures scurrying in the shadows. My, how the mighty have fallen, came a silky, amused voice from the darkness, echoing faintly through the chamber. Danzo paused, his expression hardening. From the shadows emerged a man with pale skin, golden eyes, and an unsettlingly serpentine demeanor. Orochimaru. Even in the gloom, his sinister grin was unmistakable. Orochimaru, Danzo said evenly, his voice betraying neither fear nor anger. His bodyguard stiffened as more figures materialized from the darkness, surrounding them with an almost predatory grace. You look worse for wear, old friend, Orochimaru continued, his grin widening. Exile doesn't suit you. Danzo ignored the barb, standing straight despite the oppressive weight of his situation. I am here to renegotiate our previous arrangement. Orochimaru tilted his head, his grin fading into a look of feigned disappointment. Danzo, you arrive uninvited, seeking my help, yet you offer nothing in return. Why should I waste my time on you? Danzo reached into a pouch at his side, producing a small, glowing blue crystal. Its light illuminated his face, casting shadows that made his features seem even more gaunt and severe. He held it out before tossing it casually toward Orochimaru. Orochimaru caught the crystal, his golden eyes narrowing with curiosity as he turned it over in his hands. And what is this supposed to be? Danzo clasped his hands behind his back, his gaze unwavering. The demon container, Uzumaki Naruto, has worn a pendant crafted from this material for years. I have reason to believe it is the source of certain unique abilities he has developed, abilities far beyond those of an ordinary Jinchuriki. Orochimaru's interest peaked, though he kept his expression neutral. Unique abilities, you say? Do go on. Danzo's voice remained calm, but there was an edge of pride in his tone. The boy can read minds with a precision unmatched even by the Yamanaka clan. He requires no chakra to do so, and his ability cannot be resisted by conventional means. I suspect these crystals are the key. Danzo's discovery of the crystals had been a fortunate accident. Years earlier, one of his root agents had observed Naruto disappearing into a hidden cave deep in the forest surrounding Konoha. Though Naruto had left the cave empty-handed, the agent reported the event, prompting Danzo to investigate further. When his men entered the cave, they found an entire chamber lined with the strange, glowing crystals. Danzo's initial analysis revealed that the crystals emitted a faint but unique energy signature, unlike anything he had encountered before. Though their exact properties remained unclear, the connection to Naruto's abilities made them a resource too valuable to ignore. Over years of observation, Danzo said with an even tone, "One of my agents followed the boy to a cave near the village. He retrieved a sample of this crystal. When I was forced to leave Konoha, I ensured that cave was thoroughly emptied." Orochimaru's grin returned as he held the crystal up to the faint light. "And I suppose there's nothing left in this cave for me to examine, is there?" "You suppose correctly," Danzo replied with a smirk. The snake Sanin chuckled softly. "You always were thorough, old man. And these crystals, they granted the boy his mind-reading abilities." "I have reason to believe so," Danzo said. "If I am correct, they could be the key to unlocking power far greater than what you seek through mere physical enhancements." Orochimaru's mind raced with possibilities. A material capable of enhancing or granting such abilities could revolutionize his experiments, giving him access to secrets and techniques locked away in the minds of others. The potential was limitless. "Very well," Orochimaru said finally, slipping the crystal into a pouch. "I will test this sample. If it proves useful, our arrangement will resume. But understand this, Danzo, you tread a fine line. If you waste my time, there will be consequences." With a snap of his fingers, the figures surrounding Danzo and his men melted back into the shadows, vanishing as silently as they had appeared. Danzo watched Orochimaru disappear into the darkness, his expression unreadable. He despised having to rely on the Sannin, but his exile demanded desperate measures. Only through such alliances could he reclaim what was his and secure Konoha's future under his control. Turning sharply, Danzo gestured to his guards, and they began the long trek back through the wilderness. As they emerged from the crumbling temple, the oppressive silence gave way to the rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. For the first time in weeks, Danzo allowed himself a faint smile. The game was far from over. Oh 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 oh. Anko Mitarashi sauntered into the dango shop, her favorite refuge after long days or when she simply craved a moment of indulgence. The familiar scent of sweet glaze and grilled dumplings wafted through the air, mingling with the faint tang of sake. She dropped into her usual spot near the counter, smirking as the shop owner placed a plate of dango before her without needing a word. Alongside it came a jug of sake and a small cup. "Thanks, sweetheart," Anko purred, giving the owner a wink before reaching for her first stick of dango. Her fingers brushed empty air. Frowning, she glanced down at the plate, which seemed just out of reach. Odd. She reached again, only to see the plate slide half an inch away, as if mocking her efforts. "Brat," she snarled, her voice carrying a dangerous edge as her sharp eyes scanned the shop. Spotting a telltale sliver of blonde hair disappearing behind a nearby pillar, she smirked darkly and flicked a kunai toward it. The blade thunked into the wood, and the flash of golden hair dropped out of sight with a surprised yelp. A mischievous laugh echoed from somewhere nearby. Anko glared at the few patrons who were staring at her with nervous expressions. "What are you looking at?" she snapped, her tone daring anyone to answer. As if on cue, Everyone quickly averted their gazes, suddenly finding their food or the shop walls immensely fascinating. That wasn't very nice, Anko-sensei, came a voice from beside her. Naruto grinned, his blue eyes sparkling with mischief as he perched on the stool next to her. Before he could say another word, Anko's hand shot out faster than he could react, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him nose to nose with her. Don't you ever mess with my dango again, brat. Got it? She hissed, her voice a low growl that reminded Naruto unsettlingly of her snakes. Naruto nodded frantically, his grin vanishing as he squirmed in her grasp. She released him with a shove, and he rubbed his neck, muttering, "Geez, so touchy." Anko snorted, picking up her reclaimed dango stick and taking a satisfied bite. How'd you feel if I messed with your ramen? She asked, smirking as she savored the sweet treat. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening as if he were imagining the sacrilege. Point made, he admitted with a sigh. Good. Now, let me enjoy my dango in peace, Anko said, waving him off. Naruto watched her finish her meal, practically vibrating with impatience. So, what's the plan for today? He finally asked, unable to contain himself. Anko sighed, tossing a few coins onto the counter. You really can't let a girl eat in peace, can you? She muttered, standing and stretching. She smirked at his eager expression. All right, brat, I'm guessing you don't want to waste time on D-rank missions, huh? Naruto's grimace was answer enough. Hell no, I'm not gonna be some errand boy picking up groceries or walking dogs. Didn't think so, Anko said with a laugh. Good, 'cause I'm bored of this village anyway. We're going to the Hokage Tower to grab something decent. Maybe AC rank, or if we're lucky, AB rank. Naruto's face lit up. Really? Let's go. Anko chuckled as she sauntered out of the shop, Naruto following close behind. She deliberately slowed her pace, stopping every so often to inspect a trinket in a shop window or admire a random street performer. She smirked at Naruto's growing frustration, savoring his muttered complaints. When they finally reached the Hokage Tower, they found Iruka behind the mission desk. The Chunin looked up with a smile as they approached. Well, I was wondering when you two would show up. Anko rolled her eyes. Didn't I tell you yesterday we'd be here, Iruka? Let's just get to it. Of course, Iruka said with a chuckle, pulling out a handful of scrolls. For D ranks, we have. Nope, Anko interrupted with a wave of her hand. We're here for a decent mission. Give us AC rank. Iruka froze, his jaw dropping. Are you serious? Naruto's not ready for AC rank. That's what D ranks are for, experience. He's my apprentice, not yours, Anko said flatly, crossing her arms. I know his skills better than anyone, and I'm not wasting my time or his on menial crap. No apprentice of mine is walking dogs. Iruka sighed, his protective instincts warring with his respect for Anko's judgment. Reluctantly, he set aside the D-rank scrolls and picked up one marked with a C. Fine. We've got a request from a village in northern Fire Country. They've been dealing with bandit problems. Are you sure you two can handle this? Anko glanced at Naruto, who met her gaze with eager determination. She smirked and turned back to Iruka. Yeah, we'll take it. It's time to see what the brat's made of. Iruka sighed, handing her the scroll. Just be careful, he said, looking pointedly at Naruto. Naruto grinned, giving Iruka a thumbs up. Don't worry, Iruka-sensei. I've got this. He sprinted after Anko, who stood at the village's entrance with her arms crossed and one foot tapping impatiently against the ground. Iruka watched the pair leave, shaking his head with a fond smile. Stay safe, Naruto, he murmured. Anko didn't even glance back as Naruto caught up. Took you long enough, brat, she said with a smirk. Let's see if you're worth your weight in dango. Naruto groaned. Again with the dango jokes. Anko arched a brow, shooting him a sideways look. Maybe if you didn't mess with my food, I'd have better jokes. Naruto sighed dramatically but wisely chose not to argue. As they passed through the bustling north gate, Anko asked, "You pack everything you need?" Naruto froze mid-step, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. What? Not exactly. I didn't know we were going anywhere today. I've just got my standard gear, my bow, and a quiver of arrows. Anko snorted, clearly unimpressed. Good. That's all you need. Anything else, you can forage or improvise. It'll be a lesson in survival. Improvise. Naruto muttered under his breath. This is your way of punishing me for the dango thing, isn't it? Anko shot him a toothy grin, her tone saccharine sweet. Maybe. Now move it, brat. Naruto grumbled but kept pace as they headed out of the village. The two of them spent several days traveling, their journey being mostly uneventful, and Naruto was starting to feel the monotony of the road. He practiced his telekinesis as they walked, using it to float a kunai lazily in front of him. Anko occasionally barked out orders or critiques, but mostly she let him be, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. Then Naruto stopped abruptly, the floating kunai wobbling before he let it drop into his hand. His expression grew serious, and he tilted his head slightly, listening. Anko noticed the shift and slowed down, turning to face him. What is it? Naruto pointed subtly with his chin to the right. I hear thoughts coming from over there. An old man, he's hurt. About 100 yards into the trees. Anko's eyes narrowed as she considered the situation. Her arms crossed under her chest, and her stance shifted slightly, betraying her readiness for trouble. We're getting close to the area flagged for bandit activity, she murmured, more to herself than to Naruto. Her mind raced through possibilities, weighing risks and benefits. Naruto, sensing her deliberation through the subtle shifts in her expression, and reading the surface of her thoughts, nodded in silent agreement. He tucked the kunai into his pouch and waited for her decision. Finally, Anko grinned wryly, her voice dripping with mock cheer. Well, brat, you're already dragging me off the road. Might as well make it worthwhile. Let's go. Naruto grinned back but stayed focused as they moved into the trees. He put into practice everything Anko had drilled into him about stealth, slipping through the underbrush with near-silent footsteps. Anko followed close behind, watching his movements critically but with a hint of approval in her eyes. They came upon the source of the mental distress soon enough. An elderly man, likely in his late 60s, lay crumpled on the forest floor. His face was pale, and his breathing was shallow and labored. His frail body was littered with bruises and shallow cuts, and his wrists were rubbed raw, the angry red marks unmistakably from ropes that had been cruelly tightened and fought against. Naruto crouched beside the man, his brow furrowing in concern. He's in bad shape, Anko-sensei. Looks like he's been tied up and beaten. Anko's eyes darted around the clearing, her kunai already in hand. She scanned the area with practiced precision, her voice low and sharp. Bandits might still be nearby. Stay sharp, brat. I don't want us walking into an ambush. Naruto nodded, his hand instinctively moving to the bow slung over his shoulder. He scanned the surroundings briefly before turning his attention back to the man. Gently, he rolled the elderly figure onto his back, wincing at the audible groan of pain that came with the movement. Reaching into his pack, Naruto pulled out some basic medical supplies. As he began treating the man's wounds with surprising care, the old man stirred, his eyelids fluttering. You, what? The man rasped, his voice weak and hoarse. His head shifted slightly as he tried to focus on Naruto's face. Relax, old man. We're here to help, Naruto said in a soothing tone, carefully wrapping a bandage around a particularly nasty gash. The old man's eyes widened suddenly, and with a surge of desperate strength that belied his fragile condition, he grabbed hold of Naruto's jacket. The move startled both Naruto and Anko, who tensed and raised her kunai slightly. No, the man cried, his voice cracking with urgency. You have to help my granddaughter. Please. They took her. She's all I have left of my daughter. Please. You must help her. Naruto's expression hardened as he reached out mentally, brushing against the old man's surface thoughts. Images flashed in his mind. A young girl, no older than 10, bound at the wrists and gagged as rough-looking men dragged her through the woods. He found out the man's name was Gendai, and saw him tied and beaten before being left behind. The man's panic, despair, and sheer determination to follow them burned vividly in the memory as he eventually slipped his bonds. Naruto blinked, pulling back from the man's thoughts just as Anko's skeptical voice cut in. So, let me get this straight, she said, her tone sharp. You're telling me some vicious bandits took your granddaughter but left you alive? What? They suddenly decided to show mercy. Sounds like bullshit to me. Gendai flinched, his body curling in on itself slightly as tears began to drip silently into the dirt. Anko-sensei, can I talk to you? Naruto said, cutting in before the old man could respond. Anko frowned, shooting him a confused look. What's so important? Naruto jerked his head to the side, signaling her to follow him a few steps away from the old man. Anko sighed but followed, crossing her arms as she faced him. What's this about? She asked. He's telling the truth, Naruto said bluntly. I saw it in his thoughts. They took the girl, probably to scare the villagers or ransom her. I figure they left him alive to make a point or spread fear. Anko studied him for a moment, her lips pursed. You get anything else? Yeah, I know which way they went, Naruto said, glancing back at Gendai. They're dragging a kid, so they can't be far. And, sensei, we're close enough to the village that hired us that these guys are probably the same bandits causing trouble there. Anko arched a brow and let out a low chuckle. Not bad, brat. Looks like you've been paying attention. She tapped a finger against her kunai thoughtfully before finally nodding. All right, we'll scout them out. If it's a small group, we'll take them down. If it's too big, we'll regroup and come up with a plan. Naruto grinned brightly. Thanks, Anko-sensei. He jogged back to Gendai, kneeling beside him once more. All right, old man, we're going to get your granddaughter back. You head back to your village, and we'll meet you there once it's done. Anko rolled her eyes and smacked him on the back of the head. Idiot. Don't make promises you can't keep. We'll do our best, she added, glancing down at Gendai with a neutral expression, but these things can get messy. Don't expect miracles. Gendai looked up, his weathered face filled with fragile hope. Please, just try. She's all I have left. Anko waved him off with a casual flick of her hand, already walking away. Naruto handed Gendai his canteen of water and gave him a reassuring grin. Don't worry. We'll do everything we can. Then he dashed off after his sensei, his heart already steeling itself for the task ahead.